She looked me in the eye and said it was just book club, then left wearing heels I hadn't seen in 20 years. The door clicked softly behind her, like a question I didn't want to ask. Elaine's perfume still lingered in the hallway, something jasmine, with an undernote of something warmer, almost woodsy. I knew that scent. Not from recent years, but from much earlier. She wore it when we were still newly married, when she still painted barefoot in our first apartment with the windows flung open, her hair tied up in a knot that never held. I stood in the living room for a while after she left. The silence pressed in. I could hear the faint tick of the kitchen clock, the soft hum of the fridge, but nothing else. No TV. No conversation. No laughter. Just absence. She'd said it was book club night, the same as always. First Thursday of every month. She'd started going 6 months ago, an old college friend had invited her. Said they were finally reading something with teeth. I remember nodding, relieved she was doing something social again. After the kids moved out, the house had grown quieter, more echo than home. I figured the club gave her back a little spark. What I didn't figure was the outfit. Not just the heels. The coat, deep red, sharply tailored, nothing like the puffy olive parka she wore to work. Underneath, I caught a glimpse of black silk. She looked good. Striking. Like a version of herself I hadn't seen in years. Like the woman in the photographs I used to keep in my wallet. "Don't wait up," she'd said, pausing in the doorway, her hand on the knob. "I won't," I answered, even though I always did. She smiled, small, distracted, and disappeared into the night. I stood there longer than I meant to, staring at the door. Then I turned off the lights, walked to the kitchen, and made myself a cup of tea I didn't really want. Rooibos. Elaine's favorite. I didn't know why I reached for it. Maybe I was trying to feel close to her, or maybe I was just running on muscle memory. The tea went cold before I drank half of it. I tried not to overthink things. I told myself the heels meant nothing, maybe the women at the book club had a theme, or she was just dressing up for herself. God knows she had the right to. I've always encouraged her to feel good in her skin. But I couldn't stop thinking about the way she checked her phone just before she left. How she smiled at the screen, then quickly turned it over on the counter. I noticed because she never used to do that. Elaine wasn't a secretive person. Not before. The first real shift, now that I think back, happened last December. We were at a family dinner, her sister's place. Christmas lights tangled in the hedges outside. Kids running around, that sugar-high buzz in the air. Elaine had left the room for a quick call from work, but when she returned, her lipstick was smudged, and her eyes were shining in a way I didn't quite understand. I remember asking if everything was okay. She said it was just one of the board members calling about budget revisions. I wanted to believe her. But that night, while she was in the shower, I checked her phone. Not because I was suspicious, at least, that's what I told myself, but because I was curious. She hadn't set a passcode. I don't even know what I was looking for. Messages? Calls? There was nothing. Not a single text thread before that morning. No call log either. She'd cleared it. And suddenly, my hands were trembling. I never told her I checked. What would I have said? "Hey honey, I got paranoid for no reason and snooped through your phone." We'd never been that couple. We trusted each other, or we used to. That night, I lay awake next to her for hours, staring at the ceiling while she breathed steadily beside me. She'd looked radiant earlier that day. Glowing, even. But the emptiness in her phone, that had taken something from me I couldn't name. Since then, the little details had been piling up. The charger in the guest room. The second bottle of perfume I hadn't bought. The sudden obsession with late evening walks after dinner. "Clears my head," she said. "Helps me sleep." I stopped asking questions. Because asking would mean I was ready to hear the answers. But tonight, something cracked. I walked into our bedroom, pulled the closet open, and stared at the shoes lined up along the bottom. There they were. The black heels, scuffed slightly at the toe, familiar as any part of her wardrobe. Except I hadn't seen her wear them in 2 decades. Not since our anniversary in New Orleans, when she wore that black dress and danced with me in the rain on Bourbon Street. Why now? Why tonight? I closed the closet and sat on the edge of our bed. I wanted to believe in the book club. I really did. But belief felt like holding on to fog. I picked up her spare laptop from the nightstand. She'd stopped using it since she got her tablet, but I remembered the password, our daughter's birthday. I wasn't proud of what I was doing, but I opened it anyway. Not because I wanted to catch her doing something wrong, but because I couldn't keep suffocating in doubt. The laptop was nearly empty. No recent documents. No browser history. Except one saved image on the desktop. I clicked. It was a photograph, low-res, taken at night. A wine glass on a table. A hand holding it, delicate fingers curled around the stem. Not Elaine's. A man's hand. And her reflection in the glass. She was smiling. Smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. I stared at that image until the screen dimmed. Then I closed the laptop and placed it back where I found it. The room felt colder somehow. Like something sacred had just been broken, even though I wasn't entirely sure what. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling again, just like I had that night in December. Except this time, I didn't feel alone in the dark. I felt haunted. By a smile that no longer belonged to me. The next morning, I didn't mention the photo. I didn't mention the heels, or the empty call logs, or the scent of a younger woman's perfume bottled in something familiar. I made coffee. Set out 2 mugs, the way I always do, hers with a splash of oat milk, mine black. Some habits die hard. Others die quietly. She came in around 6:30, still wearing the red coat. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, or something else. She looked distracted. Not guilty. Not ashamed. Just somewhere else entirely. Early start? I asked, keeping my voice light. Elaine jumped slightly. God, you scared me. I didn't think you'd be up. I couldn't sleep. She poured her coffee slowly. Stirred it twice. Didn't meet my eyes. How was book club? Oh. Good. We finished The Sea Between Us. Naomi hosted. She had that blue cheese you like. I nodded. Naomi. Naomi had moved to Denver in February. I should text her, I said absently, testing. Elaine froze just long enough for me to notice. She's traveling again, she said quickly. Back and forth a lot. You know how she is. I didn't answer. Just sipped my coffee. It was bitter and too hot, but it gave me something to do with my hands. She left for work 10 minutes later. I waited until I heard her car pull out, then went to the small drawer under the hall table, the one where she kept receipts, coupons, bits of paper she meant to throw away but never did. Inside, under a broken pen and 2 expired movie vouchers, I found a folded slip of hotel stationery. Room 414, Friday 8 p.m. No name. No logo. But the handwriting was hers. Careful. Slanted slightly to the right, like she always signed cards. I sat down, holding it in both hands. I knew what I was looking at. I'd known since last night, if I'm being honest with myself. But paper makes it real. Ink makes it permanent. For the rest of the day, I walked through the world like I was half dreaming. I went to the grocery store. Picked up bananas, salmon, her favorite granola. I smiled at the cashier. Drove home. Folded laundry. But I wasn't there. Not really. I was in that hotel room, wherever it was. Imagining her lying across crisp white sheets. Laughing. Whispering. Touching someone who wasn't me. That night, I told her I was meeting an old friend from work. Greg. She nodded, didn't ask which one. Didn't ask what for. That should have been the first red flag. We've been married 27 years. She always asks. I left just before 7. Not to meet anyone. I drove. No destination. Just street after street, headlights reflecting off rain-slick asphalt. My hands on the wheel, my stomach knotted with a kind of nausea I hadn't felt since the day we buried my father. It was grief. I knew that now. Grief for a marriage still standing, but hollowed out from within. Around 7:40, I parked near the Riverwalk. Not close to anything. Just a row of buildings that looked like they belonged to someone else's life. One of them was a boutique hotel. New, modern, too sleek for a couple like us. The kind of place where names don't matter. Just reservations and silence. I didn't go in. I sat in the car, watching the doors. At 7:59, she arrived. Red coat. The same one. She didn't look around. She just walked in, like she belonged there. And maybe she did. I didn't follow. I couldn't. Instead, I drove home in silence, the way you leave a funeral before the wake. Because you've already seen enough. At home, I stood in the kitchen, staring at the soft yellow light above the stove. The quiet felt heavier now. Not peaceful. Not restful. Just absence. I went to the living room and took down the painting above the mantel. Elaine painted it before our son was born, one of the few she ever finished. A blurry shoreline, soft blues and warm ochres, the brushstrokes delicate but certain. She used to say it reminded her of a dream she once had. I turned the canvas over. There, on the back, written in pencil, were the words. Some things only look calm from a distance. I stared at that line for a long time. Then I put the painting back and went to bed. Alone. I left her side of the bed untouched. Sheets smoothed. Pillow uncreased. She came home just after midnight. I didn't pretend to be asleep. But I didn't move either. She paused in the doorway. I could hear her breathing. Then the soft click of her closet, the rustle of fabric. The bathroom faucet. She slipped into bed without a word. A minute passed. Then 2. "Good night," she said. I didn't answer. Because I wasn't sure what part of this night still belonged to me. The next morning, I watched her sleep. Not in the way I used to, softly, with affection, grateful for the simple comfort of shared mornings, but with a numb, distant curiosity. Like she was someone I used to know. A face I'd memorized long ago, now slightly out of focus. Elaine always slept on her side, curled toward the window, one arm tucked under her pillow. Her hair had slipped loose from its braid. She looked peaceful. But I knew better. I moved through the house like a ghost. Made coffee. Folded the throw blanket on the couch. Checked my email. Opened one from our daughter, a photo of her new apartment in Portland, fresh paint and mismatched lamps. She wrote, "Miss you, Dad. You should come visit." I stared at that message longer than I should have. When Elaine finally came downstairs, she was humming. Actually humming. She paused in the kitchen doorway, surprised to find me up. "Didn't hear you get out of bed," she said, pouring coffee. "I didn't sleep much." She nodded, but didn't ask why. And I didn't offer. We sat at the table in silence. The way couples sometimes do when the weight of routine settles heavier than it should. She was wearing that same perfume again. Not too strong, just enough to remind me of another version of her. The girl I married. The woman who used to draw on napkins during dinners out, sketching lines of waves, rooftops, people she found beautiful or strange. I used to keep those napkins. Now I wasn't sure where they'd gone. "What's on your agenda today?" she asked, breaking the quiet. "Yard work," I said. "Maybe fix the upstairs sink." She smiled politely, like I was a neighbor she didn't know very well. "Sounds productive." And then she kissed my cheek. A quick brush of lips. Familiar. Distant. She was gone before 8. I stood in the kitchen long after the door closed, listening to the soft echo of her leaving. Then I grabbed my coat and keys. I drove back to the boutique hotel. No plan. Just a sense of gravity pulling me there. The front desk was staffed by a young man with the kind of corporate smile you only see in expensive places. "Can I help you, sir?" "I'm looking for my wife," I said. It came out sharper than I meant. He blinked. "Name, please." I paused. Then gave him hers. Elaine didn't book it under her maiden name. I knew that already. "Room 414, I said quietly. His smile wavered. "I'm sorry, sir, I can't give out guest information." "I'm not asking for information," I replied. "I'm just trying to confirm if my wife was here last night." He shifted uncomfortably. "I can't." "Look," I interrupted, "I'm not here to cause a scene. I just need to know. Please." He hesitated. Then looked at his screen. Something flickered across his face. A quick glance up at me. "She's not here now," he said, voice low. "But yes, she was checked in last night. With a guest." The word guest lodged somewhere behind my ribs. "That's all I needed to know," I said, turning away. But it wasn't. It wasn't nearly enough. I drove aimlessly after that. Through streets we used to walk. Past the cafe where she used to doodle faces on napkins. Past the bookstore she begged me to stop at every Sunday. Then down by the marina, where we'd watched fireworks the summer after our son was born. She'd been holding a lemon ice and resting her head on my shoulder. "I want to paint this one day," she'd whispered. But she never did. Instead, life happened. Mortgage. PTA meetings. Deadlines. Dishwasher repairs. Little things that stack up into decades. At some point, I stopped noticing the quiet. And maybe she stopped asking to be heard. That evening, when Elaine came home, she brought takeout. Thai food. From the place we used to go on birthdays. "I figured we could eat in," she said, setting the bags down. "Long day." "Yeah." She didn't ask for details. I didn't ask where she'd been. We ate in the living room, plates balanced on our knees. The TV murmured in the background, a sitcom neither of us watched. I looked over at her during a commercial break. She was laughing at something dumb. A laugh that didn't sound false, but it didn't sound like hers either. Or maybe it had just been that long since I really listened. "You remember that weekend in Maine?" I asked suddenly. She looked over. "Which one?" "The one where we got caught in the storm. You painted the sky from memory, and it turned out better than the photos." A pause. "Oh. That trip," she said. "Yeah. I think I still have that painting somewhere." I nodded. "You used to say the sea reminded you of your mother." Her smile faded a little. "You remember that?" "I remember all of it." The silence stretched thin between us. Then she said softly, "You've been different lately." "So have you." She looked away. Picked at her noodles. And then, too quickly, "I'm just tired, Michael. Work's been insane." I nodded. I let her believe I believed her. That night, I lay in bed long after she fell asleep. My back turned. The red coat hung over the chair in the corner. A slash of color against the gray of the room. Tomorrow, I told myself. Tomorrow I'd follow her. I wasn't ready to confront. Not yet. But I was ready to see. And what I'd see next would change everything. I followed her on a Wednesday. She said she had a late meeting with the district board, something about curriculum changes and final budget approvals. I nodded like always, kissed her goodbye like always. But I'd already placed the small GPS tracker behind her rear license plate the night before. I had no map, no plan, just a need that felt like splinters under the skin. By 5:15 p.m. her car pulled out of the driveway. I waited 2 minutes, then followed. At first, it looked routine, left on Halstead, then down Westfield Avenue, toward the high school district office. I almost believed her. But 2 blocks before the board building, she turned right. A small, subtle detour. I slowed down, let distance grow between us. She drove past downtown. Past the plaza. Past the last school zone. She wasn't heading toward a meeting. She was heading toward the lake. 20 minutes later, she turned into the parking lot of a bed and breakfast I didn't recognize. Something rustic. Expensive. Surrounded by pines and ornamental lanterns. The kind of place that sells romance packages and breakfast served in bed. She parked in the far corner. Left her coat in the car. Then walked inside. She didn't look back. And I didn't move. My hands tightened around the wheel until the leather creaked. My mouth was dry, jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. I sat there for 10 minutes. 15. Just breathing. Watching. And then a man appeared. Mid-40s, maybe. Athletic build. Dark jeans, dress shirt open at the collar. Confident. Relaxed. He looked like someone who never had to explain himself. He walked out of the trees like he belonged to them. And Elaine. She opened the door for him. No hesitation. No guilt. He kissed her on the cheek, and she smiled with her whole face. That smile, I hadn't seen it in years. Not since our last real vacation. Not since we still held hands at stoplights. They disappeared inside. The door closed softly behind them, and it felt like a casket lid slamming shut. I drove home with the windows down, even though it was cold. I needed the wind to keep me awake. My thoughts churned, but nothing stuck. Just noise. Blurs. The image of her hand on his back, guiding him in. The way her eyes sparkled. I pulled into the driveway and sat there, keys still in the ignition, staring at our porch light flickering faintly. This was our home. Our life. Our years. But tonight, she was wrapped in someone else's sheets. And I couldn't decide what hurt more, the betrayal, or how easy it seemed for her to live inside it. I didn't sleep. I lay in bed with her pillow untouched, the silence around me heavy with her absence. Around midnight, I walked into the attic. It was cold, musty. Smelled like forgotten summers and old linen. I opened the cedar chest we hadn't touched in years. Inside were things I'd nearly forgotten, her old canvas apron stained with ochre and ultramarine, a pair of paintbrushes worn down to stubby handles, the journal she used to keep. I flipped it open. The first few pages were bright with sketches. Light, full of motion. People on benches. A market in France we'd visited once. But halfway through, the drawings stopped. The rest of the pages were blank. Like she'd started a story but never finished. She came home the next morning just before dawn. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my third cup of black coffee, waiting. Her hair was messy. No makeup. Her blouse buttoned wrong. When she saw me, she froze. Couldn't sleep, I said, not looking up. She didn't respond. She walked past me into the hallway, then upstairs. No excuses. No explanation. And I let her go. For now. Later that afternoon, I called our son. I didn't tell him what was going on. Just asked about school, about the new internship, whether he liked the apartment he just moved into. He laughed, said, "You okay, Dad? You sound weird." "Just tired," I said. But what I wanted to say was, how do you tell your child that the love you taught him to believe in was never as solid as it seemed? I hung up and sat alone in the kitchen until the sun dipped below the neighbor's fence, bathing everything in a slow, gold hush. I stared at the cracks in the hardwood floor, the chipped paint on the trim. All the little things we said we'd fix but never did. Elaine came downstairs eventually. She stood in the doorway like a shadow. I looked up at her and said, "We need to talk." She blinked. "Now?" "Yes." She didn't move. "I know about him," I said quietly. "No drama. No yelling. Just truth, dropped into the room like a stone in still water." She didn't even pretend to misunderstand. She just sat down, folded her hands in her lap, and looked at me with the strangest expression. Not fear. Not guilt. But relief. I'd rehearsed what I would say. A dozen versions. Some calm, others furious. Some full of questions, others weighted with silence. But when Elaine finally looked up at me, her expression stripped of performance or charm, all the words I'd prepared dissolved. Because in that moment, I realized something. She was already gone. The version of her I knew, the woman who painted in old t-shirts and cried at commercials and used to tuck cold feet under my legs in bed, wasn't sitting in front of me anymore. This woman. She was quieter. Composed. And something in her had already closed the door. "I'm not going to lie," she said, voice steady. "Not anymore." My heart didn't break. It didn't shatter. It just settled. "Okay," I said. She stared at the floor. Her thumbs pressed against each other. "It started 8 months ago. The first time." I nodded. "I met him through a grant application process. He runs a gallery in upstate. We talked. Then talked more. It was stupid at first, flirty. Harmless. Nothing is harmless, I thought. But I said nothing. I didn't plan it," she continued. "I didn't go looking for this. But then I started to feel." She stopped. I waited. She took a breath. "I started to feel seen." Those words sliced through me. Not because they were cruel, but because they were honest. Brutally, plainly honest. "I don't know when I stopped feeling like myself," she whispered. "It wasn't one thing. It was years. It was routines. It was coming home every day to silence. It was always being the mom, or the administrator, or the one who remembered the dog's vet appointments. You were never just those things," I said, but even as I said it, it felt hollow. "Weren't I?" she asked. And I didn't have a good answer. Because in some quiet, terrible way, I'd let her become background noise. Not out of cruelty. Not even out of boredom. Just the inertia of shared life. Laundry. Groceries. Taxes. Another Sunday. Another dinner. I blinked slowly, my throat dry. "Did you ever think to talk to me?" I asked. "I did," she said. 100 times. But every time I looked at you, I saw the weight in your eyes. You always looked so tired. So worn down." She smiled, faintly. Sadly. "I didn't want to be another thing that tired you. And now? Now I don't want to be invisible anymore." The words hit harder than a slap. "But you weren't invisible," I said. You were everything. You are everything. No, she said gently. I was convenient. I was safe. But I wasn't seen. Not for a long time. I stood up, suddenly needing air. She didn't stop me. I walked to the sink, stared out the window. Our backyard was quiet. The wind moved through the maple trees like it always had. The bird feeder swayed. Life went on. Even when it shouldn't. You should have told me, I said. Even if it would have hurt. You should have said something. She nodded. You're right. Silence stretched between us again. You're not staying, I said finally. It wasn't a question. No. Her voice broke just slightly. I don't think I can. And there it was. Not rage. Not tears. Just the slow, quiet crumbling of a life built one compromise at a time. What about us? I asked. What about everything we've shared? Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. I'll always love you, she said. But I can't keep living inside something I don't recognize anymore. I turned back to her. Is he why you're leaving? She shook her head. He was the match. Not the fire. That line stayed with me. Long after she stood. Long after she left the room. Long after I heard the soft closing of the bedroom door upstairs. I stayed in the kitchen until the sky turned orange and the walls felt too big. Her coffee mug still sat on the table. I picked it up. Still warm. Still hers. And yet, not. I wanted to smash it against the wall. Instead, I placed it gently in the sink. Because even in the face of betrayal, love doesn't die like an explosion. It dies like a slow tide, slipping away grain by grain. And I wasn't ready to let it go. Not yet. She didn't sleep in our bed that night. I heard her moving upstairs, quietly gathering things, soft thuds of drawers opening, the whisper of a suitcase zipper. No door slammed. No anger. Just the quiet, methodical sound of someone unbuilding a life. I stayed downstairs. Sat in my armchair. The one with the fraying armrest and the imprint of my body carved into the cushion from years of football games and Sunday newspapers. I stared at nothing. Listened to the clock tick. Sometime around 3 a.m. I got up and walked the house. It felt different now. Haunted, in a way I couldn't explain. As if Elaine had already become memory. Her presence still lingered in the scent of her lotion in the bathroom, the scarf draped over the banister, the post-it note on the fridge reminding me to buy milk. Don't forget oat milk. Love you. That note was dated 3 days ago. I didn't throw it away. By morning, her car was gone. The suitcase, too. No letter. No last embrace. Just space. And silence. I spent the next few days moving like a man underwater. Friends texted. I didn't answer. The kids called, I picked up, but kept my voice even, my words careful. I didn't tell them she'd left. Not yet. I couldn't make it real with my own mouth. Instead, I busied myself. I cleaned the garage. I repainted the hallway. I organized the spice drawer, for Christ's sake. Anything to avoid walking past her empty office. Anything to avoid the sound of her absence echoing in the kitchen. Everywhere I turned, she was missing. And yet, everywhere I looked, she was still there. On the fourth night, I found myself in the basement. It smelled like cedar and old dust. Elaine had stored her painting supplies down there. After she stopped painting, years ago, she boxed everything up neatly, labeled it in black marker, and tucked it against the far wall. I hadn't touched them since. But something drew me in. I opened the box. Brushes, brittle with age. Tubes of oil paint, half dried. Palettes with hardened swirls of once vibrant color. And beneath it all, her old sketchbook. I sat on the floor, back against the cement wall, and opened it. Pages and pages of our life. Not posed, not polished. Just moments. Me slicing apples at the counter. Our son playing piano. Elaine's bare feet on the porch railing as she drank her morning tea. And then, one that stopped me cold. It was a drawing of her alone. Sitting at the kitchen table. Staring out the window. The date was 2 years ago. And she looked so heartbreakingly lonely in it. How had I missed that? How had I walked through our life blind to the ache beneath her smile? I closed the sketchbook. Held it to my chest like a lost child. And for the first time since she left, I cried. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just tears sliding silently down my cheeks in the dim basement light. Grief, I realized, is not always explosive. Sometimes, it's a slow leak in the foundation. And eventually, everything starts to sink. The next morning, I sent her a message. Not to beg. Not to accuse. Just 10 words. I found your sketchbook. I'm sorry I never noticed. No reply came. But I hadn't expected one. Some things aren't for fixing. They're for understanding too late. That night, I slept on her side of the bed. Not out of comfort. But because I needed to remember what it felt like to be close to the person she used to be. To feel, even faintly, what it meant to share air, and breath, and warmth. Even if it was only memory now. Her name was Elaine Foster, and I loved her since I was 22. I met her in a bookstore downtown, just off Market Street. She was arguing with the clerk about the difference between introspective and pretentious, waving a dog-eared copy of the bell jar. I stood there, pretending to browse the travel section, absolutely mesmerized. That was 30 years ago. And now, standing in that same bookstore, I felt like I'd looped back in time. Except I wasn't looking for poetry. I was looking for her. I'd found out through a mutual friend, one of those small-town overlaps you can't avoid, that Elaine had rented a short-term apartment over the frame shop near the harbor. She hadn't called. Hadn't replied to my message. But this morning, something in me refused to keep pretending that absence didn't matter. When I saw her on the sidewalk, it took everything not to freeze. She was carrying a paper bag, groceries, maybe. Hair tucked into a loose scarf, her coat cinched at the waist. She looked younger, somehow. Lighter. Elaine, I said, gently. She turned, startled. Her mouth parted just slightly. Michael? We stood there for a beat too long, like strangers in the same dream. I didn't expect to see you here, she said quietly. I know. She looked down at the bag in her hands. How did you? Laura mentioned you were staying near the harbor. Elaine smiled faintly. Laura always had a big mouth. We both laughed, but the sound felt distant. Can we talk? I asked. Somewhere quiet. She hesitated. Then nodded. There's a bench near the docks, she said. No one goes there this time of day. The harbor was quiet, the sky soft with overcast clouds. Gulls circled above, and the smell of salt clung to everything. We sat on a weathered bench, 3 feet of wood between us. I didn't come to argue, I said. Elaine nodded. I glanced at her. I miss you. She closed her eyes for a moment. Don't. I have to, I said. Because it's true. She turned toward me slowly. Michael. I'm not coming back. I know. It stung. Even now, hearing it spoken aloud. But there are things I didn't say, I continued. Not because I didn't want to. Because I didn't know how. Elaine looked out at the water. Say them now. I took a deep breath. You made me feel like I could be more. Like I was worthy of being seen. I forgot how to give that back to you. Somewhere between paying bills and fixing gutters, I stopped seeing you as you. She blinked quickly, lips pressed together. I thought being steady was enough, I said. I didn't realize how lonely you were in that steadiness. A tear slipped down her cheek. Do you remember the lighthouse trip? She asked suddenly. You packed hot chocolate in a thermos and brought that awful folding chair with the squeaky leg. I smiled. You said it sounded like a duck every time I moved. You carried me half a mile through mud when I twisted my ankle, she said. I remember thinking, I married a man who shows up, no matter what. I nodded. I never stopped showing up, I whispered. I just forgot how to ask if you still wanted me there. She leaned back against the bench. There's a version of us, she said. Where things were different. Where we stopped pretending everything was fine years ago. Where I told you I needed more. And you listened. I would've, I said. If I'd known. I think you did, she replied. You just didn't want to face what it meant. Another silence. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small. A photograph. Old. Faded at the edges. It was me, asleep on the beach, our daughter curled into my chest, both of us sunburnt and smiling. Elaine must have taken it that summer we camped on the coast. I kept this, she said. All this time. I held the photo gently, like it might dissolve. You don't have to forgive me, she said softly. But I wanted you to know that I didn't stop loving you. Even when I left. I don't hate you, I replied. I hate that it ended without a fight. Elaine stood slowly, brushing sand from her coat. Some endings are quiet, she said. Like dusk. You don't notice until it's already dark. She kissed my cheek. Warm. Final. And then she walked away. Back toward her rented apartment. Her new life. I stayed on that bench for a long time, holding the photograph. Watching the sea. Wondering what love looks like when it's no longer shared. A week passed before I touched the closet. Elaine's side still held her scent. Lavender and something citrusy. Her scarves were draped over a velvet hanger, and a stack of notebooks sat untouched on the top shelf, years of sketches and unfinished thoughts. I didn't throw anything away. I folded each sweater slowly, placed her shoes into their boxes, and lined them up like she used to, flats first, then heels, then boots she hadn't worn since the winter our son left for college. I found one of her old earrings beneath the dresser. A tiny silver hoop. I held it in my palm for a long time, like it might whisper something back to me if I stayed still enough. It didn't. Just metal. Cool. Hollow. The house felt different now. Not empty, but paused. Like it was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would become without her. I made breakfast the same way every day, eggs, toast, one mug of black coffee. I walked down to the mailbox in the mornings, said hello to neighbors who'd started looking at me with soft, tilted heads. They didn't ask. I didn't explain. Loss, I'd come to realize, doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes, it looks like one toothbrush in the holder instead of two. Sometimes, it sounds like a voicemail you keep listening to just to hear her voice say, "Hey love, I'm picking up wine, see you soon." But she won't. Not anymore. On Sunday, I drove out to the cliffs. The place where we used to bring the kids for sunrise hikes, back when knees didn't ache and laughter came easily. I brought her sketchbook with me. And a thermos of hot chocolate. The wind was sharp, but the sun was kind. I sat on the same rock we always chose, flat, sun-warmed, perfectly framed for the sea. I opened the sketchbook to a blank page. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I drew. Badly. The lines were clumsy. My shading all wrong. But I kept going, drawing the waves, the curve of the shoreline, the crooked little pine tree that leaned out over the edge like it was daring the world to take it. When I finished, I wrote 2 words at the bottom. Still here. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a new beginning. It was something else. A marking of presence. Of endurance. Of the quiet truth that even after the deepest betrayal, something within us survives. And maybe that part can be more honest. More awake. More real. That night, back at home, I packed away her things into 2 boxes. Labeled them simply, Elaine, keep. I didn't rush. I didn't cry. I just folded the past with care, knowing not everything that ends needs to be erased. Some loves stay with us, not because they last, but because they meant something when they did. A month later, I got a letter. From her. Handwritten. Slanted right. It wasn't long. Michael. I hope the light is softer where you are now. I hope you remember the laughter more than the silence. I hope you forgive me, not for leaving, but for staying too long after I'd already gone. Thank you for every kindness. For every steady day. For the life we built, even if it couldn't carry us to the end. You were never the villain. Just the part of me I couldn't keep pretending to be. I'll always love the version of us that danced in the kitchen with flour on our faces. Be well. Be soft with yourself. Love. Elaine. I read it once. Then again. And then I placed it inside the sketchbook. Tucked it between 2 pages that smelled like turpentine and sunlight. People talk about closure like it's a door you shut. But I've learned it's more like a window, one you leave cracked open, just enough to let the wind carry her name through the room every now and then. I still set 2 mugs out some mornings. Still walk past the paint aisle at the hardware store and smile like an idiot. Still find myself turning to tell her something before remembering there's no one there. But I'm healing. Not loudly. Not quickly. But deeply. Because even the strongest waves don't break the shore all at once. They return. Again and again. And over time, they shape everything. Even the hardest stone.